I am in the main menu. I click Battle. When I come in here, it shows us all the valid teams that I have built that have all of these are going to have 3 fighters on them. And so I pick the team that I want. In this case, I'm going with Aggro. I click Ready. And then I come into this is the matchmaking screen. So under available games, it shows all the games that people are looking for opponents in. So right now there's no players. And if I click new game, basically what's going to happen is if another player comes onto this screen, it'll show my game here and it'll have a join button. Now you can see Steven, he just created a game using new game and now it shows up on here. So I'm going to click join. It looks like everything is going well. So we can see I'm Metaphor and I'm challenging Steven. Now I'm just going to take a moment to talk about this gameplay screen here. So I'll start with this panel in the middle. So this is our team here. We have Hot Boy, which I was just talking about. If we click on here, we can remind ourselves of exactly how we have built Hot Boy. So he's got 2 melee training, 2 red magic training, 1 green magic training. And that also reflects the training bonuses that we gave over a Flameling. So we can see the Flameling, he starts with only 2 red magic. So we can see that in the fighter builder, I added 2 melee training to him and 1 green magic training. And then we also have all the info of how I have built. And so we can also see that all the actions that I have over here correspond to all the actions I have available on this panel. And if I right click any of these actions, it brings up the info on that action. So I can take a look again at, oh yeah, Flame Strike. Just to remind myself, if I forget what Flame Strike does, or if I forget what Defensive Strike does, I can always right click on this and it'll say, oh yeah, it doesn't attack. It just gives us our melee weapon bonus. And it also gives us a temp stat mod. Now what temp stat mod just means that when I use this action, until the end of the round, I'm going to get a stat mod and this is going to give me additional evasion. And again, I haven't got into evasion yet, but I will when we get our first attacks going here. So all the different actions here are actions that I had built here. And every round, I'm going to be selecting 1 action to use. If you've played Pokemon, this is exact same as choosing the action in Pokemon. And you can only select 1. You can see every time I select 1, it kind of gets rid of the other one. And I can see my reserve fighters here. So these are the guys that I have on the bench. And if I forget what these guys do, you can always right click on them and it'll bring up all of their data. On the other side, this is my opponent's team. I'm not allowed to click on their fighter to see how the fighter is built. But what I can see is I can tell his race is Desert Clan. So if I want to get a basic idea of what the fighter's capable of, you can always click on their race and go, oh, okay, well, a Desert Clan starts with 1 melee training, 2 dexterity training. They have a little bit of firepower, a little bit of earth power. And so you can get a kind of general sense of what your opponent might be going for. So I would guess he's going to do something with melee and dexterity, and so he might be attacking me with melee weapons. Now, Steven might not know this, so this might come as a little bit of a shock to him, but if you look at a Flameling starts with 0 mass and 1 lift. So Flameling actually starts off airborne. So if he tries to attack me with a melee attack, it's going to miss. So we'll see if he's going to find that out the hard way. Now, up here we have the resource panels. Now the garden, we can see every game we start off with 3 lily pads and 1 lotus and 1 scarab on each of these. Now, when we use scarabs, we always start off using the ones on the lily pads. And then once we've used all those scarabs, we go to the ones on the lotus. And that's because the ones on the lotuses, remember, once you take them off a lotus, you can't put them back on. So if I use 3 or fewer scarabs during a round, I'm only going to be using the ones on lily pads. But if I use 4, then I'm going to take this guy off. And over here is our mana pool. So since my active fighter is a Flameling, we can see a Flameling has 1 fire aura, which means I generate 1 fire mana at the start of each round. And so this represents our mana pool. Usage, on the other hand, this is how many resources we are using during the round. Now, since I have Flame Strike selected, this is kind of a quick look at how many resources you have. So I can see if I try to click Flame Strike as a minor action, it adds a fire and a gray mana. This is called the gray mana up to the top left. And so we can see this round now, I'm going to be using 2 fire mana and 1 gray mana. But I only have 1 fire mana, so we get a little alert here showing that I'm using too many mana, and if I try to do this, I'm not going to be able to do all of the things that I have selected. And you can always click reset to kind of go back to the start. Gray mana, I haven't actually talked about yet. This is kind of a wild card. Now, what gray mana means is you can use any type of mana to pay for it. So if I have a gray mana here, let's say I had 2 fire mana and a shock mana, and I have to pay for this, I can use my shock mana to pay for it. So it's kind of just a wild card. You can use any mana for it. So in order to gain more mana, I can also click this gain mana at the bottom here. The first mana you gain costs 2 scarabs. So if I click this, you can see my usage goes up by 2 scarabs to show that I'm gaining a mana. When I click it, ice and water are grayed out, and that's because I have negative water power and negative ice power. If you have negative power, you can't gain mana of that type. The other ones I'm allowed to though. So I'm just going to load up on fire mana. One thing to note is since your scarabs come back every turn, you kind of always want to use all the scarabs you have on lily pads. So I'm using 2 out of my 3, and so I might as well use an additional scarab somewhere, and that's kind of where these other minors come in. You can use any number of minor actions. So I'm just going to use Ruby Ring. Ruby Ring, when I use it, it gives me +1 red magic, and that could come in useful. I don't actually think either of these help me with the actions that I want to use, but I'm just going to use it for the hell of it. And then once I'm all ready to go, I would say always double check your usage to make sure that you can pay for everything. So 3 scarabs, okay, that's good. 1 fire mana. Whenever you gain mana here, it shows up here immediately. And so once we're ready to go, let's hit ready, and we're going to start. Now it's going to happen pretty fast. At the start is the mana phase, so we can see we each gained a fire mana. Steven activated his Femme Fatale action, and we can see here, so I was faster. I used Flame Strike. He took 27 damage from Flame Strike, and then he used Precision Strike, which is a melee attack. And as I mentioned, that I probably should have mentioned this to Steven before starting, that Flamelings are airborne, but we can see Hot Boy avoided damage because they are airborne.